Dark Souls 1 came out in 2011, and looking at what else came out that year, it was a pretty crazy year. Batman Arkham City, Battlefield 3, fucking Skyrim came out that year. 2011 was also 13 years ago, which is crazy because all of those games I mentioned above hold up really well in 2024, and I think that includes Dark Souls. Now, when it comes to the lore of Dark Souls 1, I wouldn't say I'm quite as familiar with it as I am for a game like Bloodborne, but I'm super familiar with the gameplay. This was my first Souls game, and I've played it so many times that it's really lost a lot of its difficulty for me. But enough about all that. Dark Souls 1 begins with a cutscene explaining the very general backstory of the game. In the beginning, the world was stagnant, covered by a thick fog and arch trees. Arch trees are a strange concept that we'll go over later. The world at this time was ruled over by the stone-scaled everlasting dragons. As the name suggests, they couldn't die. That was until fire appeared under the ground, bringing change to the stagnant world. Living under the ground were these simple primordial beings, and these beings discovered Lord Souls in the fire, which changed some of them into godlike beings. Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight and Major God of the world, the Witch of Izalith, who then studied and tried to master the fire, Nito, the first of the dead and a giant mass of skeletons, and the Furtive Pygmy, who discovered the titular Dark Soul. The Furtive Pygmy is described as being easily forgotten. Now, there are theories about what characters might be the Pygmy in-game, but personally I think the reason he's forgotten is because rather than hoarding his power and making himself a god, he split it amongst all of humanity. This is what changed the simple and stagnant primordial beings into the ambitious humans that built society. But while he was doing that, the other lords were taking the fight to the dragons. With the help of a traitor dragon, Seath the Scaleless, a dragon who was born without the scales that made them immortal, the lords learned that lightning was the key to destroying the scales of the dragons, thus killing them. Gwyn and his newly established knights were the leaders of this charge, as they wielded lightning magic, but the witch and her daughters threw fire at them, and Nito unleashed a miasma of death. They were probably just included in the cutscene as participation trophies, but after defeating the dragons, the lords went their separate ways and built their own kingdoms. We'll catch up with them later, but for now let's talk more about Gwyn and the humans. So Gwyn, being the most powerful of the lords, established himself and his later children as the gods of the land, to rule over humanity and be worshipped by them. Now remember that the Pygmy received a dark soul, compared to the other lord souls which were bright and fiery. The age that happened after the dragon's death was called the Age of Fire, because the lords got their power from the fire that started way back in the day. But fire has this habit of going out eventually, leaving only darkness behind. This means that it was destined that eventually the lords would lose their power, and humans, with the darkness inside of them, would come to rule the world. Gwyn could not allow this. He couldn't allow himself to lose his power, so he laid the dark sign on humans, a ring of fire around the dark soul within them. He then divided his lord soul among his allies, and linked the first flame to keep it from fading for longer. We'll learn what that means later. Anyway, this ring of fire around human souls was called the dark sign, and it limited their power from growing as the flame faded. Now, as the flame faded, humanity started becoming what's called an undead, meaning they could no longer die. Now, initially an undead isn't a zombie, but after dying hundreds or even thousands of times, they become hollow, where they've almost completely lost their minds and their souls. Now, the dark sign kept humanity from rising as the flame faded, but the flame was still fading. So Gwyn went to link the first flame. We'll find out what that means later, but that's our mission as well. We're a chosen undead sent on a divine quest to link the fire and keep the world going for just a little longer. We come to in an undead asylum, a place where undead are sent when they go hollow. A mysterious figure drops us a key that we can use to escape our cell. This asylum is guarded over by these massive fat-ass demons. We can see one patrolling around, but we can't fight that one until much later. Moving through the asylum, we eventually get ambushed by another one of those demons. The only weapon we have at this point is a broken sword, so there's no point in fighting it yet. We continue through the asylum, eventually finding weapons, until we find this dying undead named Oscar of Astora. Astora is one of many far-off kingdoms that are really just mentioned in the game, and we don't know much else about them. Oscar tells us that he's failed his mission to link the flame, but asks that we continue it for him. He gives us our healing item, an Estus flask, and a key, and asks us to ring the Bell of Awakening, a crucial task in our divine quest. He then dies and we continue on, coming face to face with the demon who ambushed us earlier. With a weapon now, we make short work of it though, and escape the asylum. We get grabbed by a giant crow and taken to the land of Lordran, specifically Firelink Shrine. This is more or less the hub of the first half of the game. There's a couple NPCs here. This crestfallen doomer who tells us there's actually 2 of those Bells of Awakening we need to ring. There's this cleric over here named Petrus who can teach us miracles and says he's waiting for someone. And finally, there's the completely silent Firekeeper, who's responsible for keeping the bonfire here going. All of these characters will come back into it later, but for now let's continue down the main path of the game and head into the Undead Burg, a place that was once home to thousands of undead, but is now filled with only hollows. There are signs of fighting all over the city, so we can guess that the still lucid undead try to fight off the hollows, but eventually they all ended up in the same place. One important enemy type we find here are the Black Knights, some of Gwyn's finest soldiers. The ones we saw in the intro had silver armor though. The armor of these ones seems to have been scorched black. Now Gwyn really should have trained these guys to watch their backs because they just cannot defend against backstabs. But our first boss of the game is a giant bull demon called Taurus Demon. Demons are an interesting piece of lore that we won't learn about until later, so just go with it for now. The bull demon is a pretty easy fight though, and we can continue onto this bridge where we get cooked by a drake. This isn't an actual dragon, as those guys are immortal. We can meet a couple of them later. This is just a shitty drake. If you shoot off its tail, you can find the Drake Sword. Not that kind of Drake Sword, but it's a super powerful early game weapon. It pretty much trivializes the early game, but has no stat scaling, and the material used to upgrade it is both rare and better used elsewhere. Continuing onwards, we can make our way to the Undead Parish, where we can find a lot of the best NPCs in this entire series. First is the iconic Solaire of Astora, a warrior of the sun. Warriors of the sun, also called Sun Bros, are all about helping other people and gazing at the sun. He offers to help us in whatever we need. In exchange, we can pay it forward by helping other people who need it. What a great guy. Next, after fighting an armored pig and a bunch of knights, we can find Andre of Astora, this friendly old blacksmith who's always telling us to watch out, as he wouldn't want to see us go hollow. He can upgrade your weapons up to certain levels which are dictated by the embers you've given him. He's also a great guy. Next is Siegmeyer of Katarina. This knight wearing armor looks like an onion sitting next to the entrance of a giant fortress. The doors are closed and he doesn't know how to open them, so his best idea is to just wait around until eventually the doors open. He's on some kind of quest, although he doesn't tell us what yet. Finally is Lautrec of Karim, who's locked in a cell on the top floor of this chapel. Using a key found nearby, we can free him and he tells us he'll be happy to reward us for helping him, only later. Unlike the last three, Lautrec isn't a great guy, he's actually a pretty big asshole. Anyway, the next boss is the Bell Gargoyles, these stone gargoyle creatures put here to guard the Bell of Awakening. The point of this is probably to test an undead before allowing them to ring a bell and truly begin their quest to kindle the fire. Killing them, we can ring our first Bell of Awakening and nothing really happens yet. The other is in Blighttown, so we'll have to go there next. Before doing that though, let's head to Darkroot Garden, fighting past a giant one-legged Titanite demon who's in the way. Now we should be glad these things are always missing a leg, because they'd be fucking huge if they could stand up, but Darkroot Garden is filled with living bushes who want to attack us. And deeper in we can find these giant guardians of the forest wearing moss-covered armor. Their presence, as well as the various ruined buildings around the forest, indicate that there was once some kind of civilization here. Fighting past them, the bushes, living trees, and a couple weird-looking lizards, we can reach the area boss, the Moonlight Butterfly. A very beautiful creature with a very annoying boss fight. It basically flies around for a couple minutes casting spells at you, until it lands and you can actually attack it. With the Drake Sword, I managed to make this only last 2 cycles, but usually you'll be spending a long time just watching this thing float around. After beating it, we can find the dead body of a blacksmith who looks a lot like Andre. He's carrying a divine ember, which we can give to Andre to enhance his smithing, as well as a key to a basement watchtower. Heading to that watchtower in a further area of Darkroot reveals an ancient hero trapped within, Havel the Rock. Havel was a follower of Allfather Lloyd, the god of law and castle. He was one of a few minor, unimportant gods that joined Gwyn as the rulers of the world. Havel fought the Emerald Dragons alongside Gwyn and his knights. His armor is carved out of literal stone, and he wields the giant tooth of a dragon as a weapon. He was locked down here by this blacksmith, Havel's friend, after he went hollow. He can easily one-shot you with that giant club, but just like Gwyn's Black Knights, he's super vulnerable to backstabs. Darkroot Garden also connects us to the Valley of Drakes, this very unimportant area that will later connect to a more important one. It's filled with, as you might suspect, drakes, but they're not really worth fighting as they have a shitload of damage resistance. Now with all that covered, we need to find out how to get to Blighttown. Now if you have a master key, an item you can start the game with, you can go in the back way and save yourself a lot of time. That's some pussy shit though, so we head to the lower Undead Burg. In the crowded city streets, we can find someone trapped behind a door. Using a key bought from a shady merchant up above, we can open it to find Griggs of Vinheim. Vinheim is the place where a lot of sorcery comes from, and Griggs will teach you that magic if you're smart enough, and you can give him scrolls to learn more magic. Moving on, we can find a bunch of undead rogue-type enemies, probably the people who locked Griggs up, as well as their dogs. Clearly the lower burg isn't doing much better than the upper. The boss of this area is a total noob stomper, Capra Demon. The demon himself is light work, but he has 2 dogs with him. Dogs are in every single Souls game, and they're always super annoying. But after beating the goat demon, we get a key to head down to the sewers. Leading up to the sewers is this room with 2 of these butcher ladies in it. They're about to carve up this friendly pyromancer named Laurentius, but luckily we save him and kill the 2 cannibals. Before we can head into the sewers proper though, let's go back to Firelink to chat to a couple NPCs. We can catch up with Griggs. Now I was too stupid for him to teach me any spells. Laurentius on the other hand is a super chill guy with a nice voice who gives you a free pyromancy flame.
Oh yeah, by the way, I can share the spells with you. I think you have a knack for it, all you need are the materials. I'll be pleased to help you.
Now the cool thing about pyromancy in Dark Souls 1 is that it doesn't scale with any skills. It scales with how upgraded your pyromancy flame is. So any character can use pyromancy if you have attunement slots. Laurentius tells us that pyromancy is a very natural form of magic compared to sorcery. There's fire at the heart of this world, and basic pyromancy is just channeling that. Next, let's chat with that cleric who's waiting for his companions. It seems that they've arrived. One of them is this weird cleric who just mumbles at you.
Effective.
The other is kind of a cocky asshole. They're all escorting this girl named Rhea down to the catacombs to find kindling for bonfires. None of them seem too thrilled to be doing this, but as a cleric, it is their duty. We'll catch up with them later. Finally, let's chat with Lautrec, the guy we saved from that prison cell. Like I said, he's an asshole, and our reward for freeing him is just a sunlight medal, the item you get for cooperating with Sunbros. That's all we'll get from him now, though, but there's one last super important NPC I should mention. This old lady in the sewer sells you moss.
You still have your senses about you. Then why won't you buy some of my moss? I need your souls.
You know, the plug's a little weird, but she's chill. And that's about it. Let's get into those sewers. So the sewers are about as fun as you could expect. Crawling through shit, fighting living shit piles and rats. There's also the curse-giving basilisks down here. Curse in Dark Souls 1 is absolutely devastating because you lose half your health until you can find a purging stone. Well, it would be super devastating if that old granny at the top of the sewers didn't sell them. But you find a shitload of rats down here, culminating with a fight against a giant rat, but eventually we find this guy named Domhall of Zena. He sells crystal weapons that are a lot like the Drake Sword, very powerful base damage but no scaling, and they also can't be repaired. Later on he'll sell us boss items, so he's a good guy to know, and he'll also give us tips after we spend enough money with him. The boss of this area is the Gaping Dragon. The fight opens up with this little otter-looking thing poking its head out at you, only to reveal that's just the tip of the dragon. I imagine the dragon uses that thing as bait for its prey, kind of like an anglerfish in its lure. This thing is an ancient and very deformed descendant of the immortal dragons of old. It was probably slowly mutated into this beast by living in the sewers and feeding on literal shit. It also definitely doesn't look a little sus. Gaping Dragon isn't too hard to beat, but if you cut off its tail, you can get another dragon weapon like the Drake Sword. This one called Dragon King Great Axe. So maybe the Gaping Dragon was once a king of dragonkind, but after probably thousands of years of eating shit, it became this thing. Pretty cool boss, and killing it gives us the key to Blighttown, where we'll find the second Bell of Awakening. Now, as the name suggests, Blighttown is a very diseased place with a giant poison swamp at the bottom. People exiled from the land above end up in Blighttown, where they had to eke out an existence living in filth and disease. The area is filled with giant monstrous insects, and all inhabitants are mutated and diseased in one way or another. Where you find most people is in this shanty town built above the swamp. Clearly the people of the town tried to avoid the disease, but just by looking at them, they failed. One very important NPC we find here is Quelana, the daughter of the Witch of Izalith. If your pyromancy flame is upgraded enough, you can see her chilling in the swamp and become her pupil. She once trained another student named Solomon, who's now known to be the greatest pyromancer of all time. She tells us that she fled her mother and sisters, but doesn't tell us why yet. At the bottom of the swamp, we find the area boss, Chaos Witch Quelaag. Definitely the most attractive spider I've ever seen. Just like Quelana, she's a daughter of the Witch of Izalith, giving her access to some very powerful chaos pyromancy. We don't know why exactly she turned into this spider creature yet, though. After defeating her, we can find her sister, another half-woman, half-spider, simply called the Fair Lady. If we talk our way past her egg servants, we can actually join her covenant. We can't understand what she's saying, though. It's important to mention that she's also a firekeeper, just like the one at Firelink and one we'll meet later. Also past Quelaag is the second Bell of Awakening. Ringing it opens the massive doors of that fortress the Onion Knight was at earlier. We're about to find out why they're called the Bells of Awakening. Heading back to Firelink, we first find the Lautrec has disappeared, and the Firekeeper is dead. On her corpse is a black eye orb, an item that allows you to get revenge on her killer. The orb can only be used in Anor Londo, though, which we are obviously not at. We also find out that that cleric, his name is Petrus, has seemingly lost his companions down in the catacombs. He seems distraught about having failed his lady, and again, we'll catch up with them later. We can also tell Laurentius about Quelana, prompting him to go down there to find her. Finally, having come out of the ground in Firelink is this massive, weird-looking serpent thing. This is why they're called the Bells of Awakening, as they awaken the primordial serpent, King Seeker Frampt, from his slumber. He says that by ringing both bells, we've proved more worthy than most undead, and confirms that our mission is to succeed Gwen and link the fire. Our next step then is to travel to that fortress, Sen's Fortress, and make it to the City of the Gods, Anor Londo. He says that no one before us has actually come out of Sen's Fortress though, but he's sure that we'll be different. Now, Sen's Fortress is a really annoying area, but in a fun way. Like some areas in games just suck because of poor design, whereas Sen's Fortress sucks because it's meant to suck. It's a giant castle filled with constant traps and snake people. If you're worthy enough to get through Sen's fortress, you get to go to Anor Londo. Thus far, no undead have, though. To find a couple examples of this, the Onion Knight can be found inside. Moving what direction this machine launches boulders will allow him to continue. We also find one of the best sorcerers alive, Big Hat Logan. I'll leave it up to you why he's called that. If we free him from this cage, he'll go back to Firelink and teach you sorceries. Except again, I was too dumb for it. He was really nice about it, though.
I'm afraid that you are unable to learn sorcery. The basic framework, you see, it cannot be taught. Oh, do not fret. Life isn't all about sorcery. You will find your own way. Don't frown with regret. Peer forward with your head high.
We can find an undead named Ricard who wears the elite knight armor. He seems to have been here so long he went hollow. There's also the summon of the area, Black Iron Tarkus, a badass guy who also couldn't do it. We get a lot of this information from this crestfallen merchant, a guy who came here hoping to find riches in Anor Londo but got stranded with everyone else. Now he goes around gathering the gear of the undead who die in this place. He's a total downer, but he's nice enough. The area boss is the Iron Golem, an area that itself isn't too hard at all, but fitting with the theme of Sen's Fortress, the environment is the real threat. Both times I died were due to falling off the map, but once you get past that, he's not too hard, and the path to Anor Londo is clear. Using this weird little golden circle, we get kidnapped by these bat demons and brought to the City of the Gods, I think the most beautiful area in any Dark Souls game. It's this massive golden city just bathed in sunlight, fitting since it was once ruled over by the god of the sun. At a bonfire in the city we can find another firekeeper, although rather than being a mute girl or a spider woman, this one has a full-on suit of armor and serves as a protector of the city. Moving through the city, we make our way across these very perilous rafters, fighting enemies called Painting Guardians, who definitely aren't members of the clan. The painting they're guarding can be found on the bottom floor, but we can't do anything with it just yet. We make our way to this massive lift in the center of town. It can take you down to join the Blades of the Dark Moon, which will let you invade players who have sinned. After that, we head towards the main castle. The doors are locked though, so we have to go around the side. This is one of the most notorious parts of Dark Souls 1, where you have to run past these two Silver Knight Great Archers. If they hit you with an arrow, your ass is falling off the cliff. Past them, we find ourselves in a small offshoot of the castle and find two familiar faces. First is Solaire sitting at a bonfire, and he decides to rizz us up a little.
You really are fond of chatting with me, aren't you? If I didn't know better, I'd think you had feelings for me. Oh no, dear me, pretend you didn't hear that.
And much further on we'll find Siegmeyer as well, stuck in yet another predicament. This time he's waiting outside of a room with 3 Silver Knights in it. He says that he'll need at least 5 more men before he takes that fight, so we have to go and clear out the room for him. The Onion Knight thanks us once again and continues his journey. After fighting our way past many Silver Knights, we can open the door to the main castle and then head through a door to the other side, which lets us find this giant blacksmith. He's just as friendly as Andre, which is something that can't be said for the third blacksmith in the game. Now giants seem to be servants of the gods in some way. Sen's fortress was manned by giants, and many of the enemies found in Anor Londo are these armored giants. There's a theory that Gwyn himself is a giant, but I'm not so sure about that because the only child of his we see in game is definitely not a giant. And Gwyn doesn't really look like the other giants. Now he could have used his power to change his appearance to look more human, but I'm not sure about all that. Finally, we can reach the area boss, Dragonslayer Ornstein and Executioner Smo, a boss that had me stuck for months the first time I played this game. Now Ornstein is one of the 4 Knights of Gwyn, beings that received a small portion of Gwyn's Lord Soul for their service in the Dragon War. The other 3 we'll see later. Smo is the Royal Executioner of Anor Londo. Now he really wanted to be one of Gwyn's knights, but due to the fact that he literally grinds up the bones of his victims to eat to make him stronger, he was always rejected. Now you might have noticed that the so-called City of the Gods seems to be lacking gods. That's for a reason. After Gwyn exiled his firstborn son, a god of war. Now this is a piece of lore that we only learn in Dark Souls 3. In 1 you never know why he did this or who his son was. But Gwyn exiled his son because he was kind of a dragon fucker. Well, maybe not that far, but he did ally himself with the ancient dragons for some reason, obviously going against everything his father fought for. We also learn that Gwyn's daughter, Gwynevere, the goddess of fertility, also left Anor Londo, so when Gwyn went to go link the First Flame, he left his other son, Gwendolyn, to rule. We'll talk more about him later, but once you kill either Ornstein or Smo, the one left alive will absorb the other's power. Ornstein by paying respects to his fallen comrade, Smo by finishing the job. After killing them, we can ride up an elevator and open the door to find Gwynevere herself, a giant woman laying there in all her glory. But wait, I hear you saying, I thought you said she left Anor Londo. Well, hold on a minute, man, goddamn. Anyway, she gives us the Lord Vessel, an item that finally unlocks fast travel and also what we'll use to store all the Lord souls we collect. Now before we proceed, we can use that black eye orb we got from the Firelink Shrine Firekeeper's body to hunt down her killer. Turns out it's Lautrec. He has these 2 jobbers with him, but you only have to kill Lautrec to get back the Firekeeper's soul and get revenge. Alright, now you can take the Lord Vessel back to Kingseeker Frampt, and it'll take you down below to Firelink Altar, the place where you can gather the other 4 Lord souls. He takes you down there by eating you. If you don't want to do all that though, you can say fuck Frampt and jump down the hole yourself, and he gets all butthurt if you do this and leaves.
You sorry fool. You could not be the chosen one. Enough. I shall slumber until I am awakened again.
Now back at Firelink, we can restore the soul of the Firekeeper and regenerate her body. I didn't mention before, but she was missing her tongue. Her new form has a tongue though, and she uses it to tell us her name is Anastasia. And that for some reason she would rather not speak as her tongue was in some way tainted. Whatever that means. Anyway, we can find our onion friend back here again, and he says that he's about to head back down below to Blighttown. We still don't know why he's doing all of this, but a little farther away in Undeadburg we can find Solaire at a shrine to Gwen, gazing at the sun again. I didn't mention before, but Solaire's purpose in these lands is to find his own sun. And he could mean that literally, or he could just mean that he wants to become as radiant and inspirational as the sun. He's pretty distraught though, as he hasn't found it yet and is running out of places to look. Alright, so at this point our mission is to claim all 4 pieces of the Lord Souls that are still around. We need to kill Gravelord Nito, the Witch of Izalith, and the 2 lords that Gwyn gave the biggest parts of his soul to. These are the 4 kings of New Londo and Seath the Scaleless. Before that though, I should probably elaborate on what I meant when I said Guinevere had left Anor Londo. You might be saying, clearly she hasn't, as she gave us the Lord Vessel. Well, why don't we go back and pay her another visit? If you, for some reason, decide to attack the supposed goddess, she fades away, revealing herself as an illusion. It's not just her though, almost everything in Anor Londo was an illusion. The giant guards disappear, the bat demons disappear, the sun itself disappears. The only enemies that weren't fake were the Painting Guardians and the Silver Knights. The giant blacksmith's still here too. I mean, he better be. But the caster of this illusion was Gwyndolin, and his lore is kind of weird. So it's said that he was born with a repulsive appearance. I think what that's referring to are his snake legs, the rest of him looks fine to me. But he was also born under the sign of the moon, which gave him powerful moon magic. The sign of the moon is apparently feminine though. Okay, so now it gets a little weird. Because of his snake legs and the fact he was born under the wrong star sign, Gwyn decided to have him raised as a girl. He always wore feminine clothing and even had a ring to let him pass as a girl. Now why the fuck would he do that? Because Gwyn didn't want him as the heir to the throne, he wanted his other son, the God of War. Now remember that the God of War turned out to be a dragon fornicator and was banished, and Guinevere left for her own reasons, leaving Anor Londo in Gwyndolin's hands. When Gwyn linked the flame, the sun itself stopped shining on Anor Londo, and I already said that no one really liked Gwyndolin, so literally everybody left, leaving only Gwyndolin, a couple Silver Knights, the Painting Guardians who only care about, well, guarding the painting, and his Blades of the Dark Moon. Besides the giant blacksmith, the Firekeeper was also real, although she's pretty pissed that we attacked what we thought was a god. She basically calls us a dirty peasant and wonders how an undead like us could have made it this far. Now, why did Gwyndolin do all of this? Well, Guinevere, being the goddess of fertility, was loved by pretty much everybody. So by creating an illusion of her, he had hoped to keep the veneer of a functional and great Anor Londo going, when really there was nothing left here. When we make our way through Dark Anor Londo, we can find Gwyndolin himself. This fight is actually a lot like the Moonlight Butterfly. You chase him down this endless hallway, dodging magic and killing him one hit at a time. I imagine that this fight would suck for non-strength users, but once you kill him we can find Gwyn's very own tomb. Well, kind of. His body isn't in the tomb, but it was made to honor him. It has decent loot, including one completely empty chest. Now it's time to get back on the Lord Soul hunt. You can do these in whatever order you want, but I'm starting with the Witch of Izalith. Heading back down to Blighttown, we can catch up with a few NPCs. First is Siegmeyer. He's trapped in the poison swamp with no antidotes, so we can go ahead and give him a couple to get him back on his feet. We also find Laurentius down here, and as it turns out, he wasn't as capable as he thought, and he went hollow looking for Quaylana down here, and we have to kill him. Talking to Quaylana herself, she tells us what to expect in Izalith. She says that her mother tried to harness the power of her Lord Soul to create another primordial flame, but it only resulted in destruction when the witch created a chaotic flame. She says the flame caused her mother and sister to mutate into horrible creatures like Quelaag and the Fair Lady. Well, we were about to see for ourselves what happened down there as we head past the aforementioned spider lady into Old Izalith. So we emerge into this lava-filled pit. There's not much to do here except fight the area boss, Ceaseless Discharge. What a name. Now, Ceaseless here is the only son of the Witch of Izalith, and just like the rest of his family, he turned into a giant monster because of his exposure to the Chaos Flame. Now, rather than becoming a hot half Spider-Man, Ceaseless is this giant mass of flaming arms and tentacles, and he seems to be in immense pain. He doesn't even attack you until you raid his sister's grave and steal her clothes. I mean, understandable. Now, actually trying to fight him sucks, so what you should do is make that dumbass fall off a cliff instead. Anyway, Ceaseless shows us that the transformations happening because of the Chaos Flame are clearly getting worse the deeper that we go. As we move in, we fight hordes of Taurus and Capra demons, two enemies that were previously bosses. The ones above ground probably escaped from down here, and because there's no one to really resist them, they were able to gain a foothold. Same with the Titanite demons, although I'm not sure why so many ended up trapped in Sen's Fortress. The boss of this area is an Asylum demon reskin called Demon Fire Sage. Now, FromSoft loved this enemy design so much they not only used it 3 times in this game, but once again in Dark Souls 3, and there's even more in Elden Ring. Now, after you defeat him, you can pretty much head straight to the next boss, but you don't want to do that yet. If you defeat the next boss, Centipede Demon, we'll later find Solaire possessed by this little parasite thing and have to kill him. The bug is glowing, so Solaire believes that he did finally find his own son, but it's just a demon insect. What you need to do is give 30 humanity to the fair lady. Now, it's a shitload of humanity, and I actually had to grind a little multiplayer to get it all. But once you do that, you can open a shortcut near Demon Fire Sage that allows you to kill the parasite before it would latch on to Solaire. You might as well just restart the game if you forgot to do this, to be honest. Now, this shortcut also allows you to skip an entire boss in a very annoying area, but that's some pussy shit, so we're going the long way. To do that, we have to fight the Centipede Demon, and man, this boss also sucks. I don't know why I like this game so much, man, especially since the next boss is even worse. Now, this boss room is filled with lava that just destroys your health if you step in it, so you have to cling to these tiny swatches of land to try to fight the demon. That's not even mentioning that I think this boss inspired all of the camera beasts in Bloodborne, because you can also never hit it or see what it's doing. Anyway, if you cut off its tail, then kill the tail, you get a ring that lets you walk on the lava without taking as much damage. But at that point, the demon will probably be mostly dead anyway. Now, this ring is interesting because it was created for Ceaseless Discharge to hopefully relieve his horrible pain from constantly burning alive, but somehow it ended up in this demon's hands. Anyway, next up is maybe the worst section in any game. Running through the lava while being chased by these giant fucking leg monsters. The lava damage isn't the worst part, it's the fact that you're constantly being ear raped by the damage sound. Now, what are these leg monsters? Well, they're the top half of these enemies called undead dragons. How do the two halves separate? Who the fuck knows? But the undead dragons were created by the Chaos Flame, so they're more like dragon demons. This section is genuinely horrible, but after that you reach the main part of Izalith, filled with these giant toilet bowl monsters who spit corrosive acid at you. Now, did I mention that the second half of Dark Souls was very rushed? Well, it was. That's why some of these late game areas are complete trash. Now, we can catch up with Solaire down here. If you didn't kill that bug, he'll be possessed, but if you did, he'll just be depressed and say that he still hasn't found his own son. You can also find Siegmeyer down here, and he wants to finally repay you by helping you fight a horde of those toilet demons. Now, I failed this quest here, but here's how it can go. If Sieg survives with over 50% health, you get to progress his quest and later save his daughter from the Duke's archives. This was what he was doing here, trying to find and save his daughter. Now, if he has less than 50% health at the end of the fight with a bunch of demons in a poison swamp, by the way, he dies here. Great, love that. Anyway, as we approach the boss, we kill another of the witch's daughters before finally finding the witch itself. Except we don't get an awesome cinematic boss fight against the Master Pyromancer. No. We get to fight a burning tree that knocks us off the map. This fight is basically, go to the left side to destroy one part, get killed. Go to the right side to destroy the other, get killed again. Go to the middle, get killed. Go to the middle again and kill this little insect inside the tree. And whoa, you beat the boss. Now, I've been hating way too much recently, so let's just go into the lore. So I said all of this earlier, but the Witch of Izalith wanted to recreate the first flame. She did this by creating the Chaos Flame. It didn't initially burn out of control though, and they were able to use its power to create the demons. This was also around the time Ceaseless Discharge got turned into his whole mess. These demons were actually productive members of Izalith society too, so the witch continued to experiment with the flame, eventually creating Chaos Flame Pyromancy. As the name would suggest though, the flame eventually grew out of control and mutated the witch and her daughters. The lucky ones became spider creatures. However, the witch and two of her daughters all got melded together to create the Bed of Chaos. The flame grew so powerful it destroyed the society of Izalith, leaving only demons behind. Speaking of demons, the Bed of Chaos now spat them out at such a rate they threatened to destroy the entire realm. So Gwyn and his Silver Knights went down to cull the demonic infestation. The knights who participated in this war had their armor scorched black, creating the Black Knights. This war was a complete failure. I mean, we just saw the conditions they were fighting in, fucking lava land out here. So eventually Gwyn and his knights retreated and sealed off Izalith. We know that a couple demons still managed to escape due to the Taurus, Capra, and Titanite demons scattered around, but the problem was mostly under control. Gwyn also enslaved some of the weaker demons, like the Bats in Enarlando and the Asylum demons, but the vast majority of them were trapped underground. When we kill the Bed of Chaos, we get the Witch's Lord Soul and can finally leave this shithole forever. On the way out, we can catch up with Quaylana. She thanks us for freeing her family. Now, before we can continue with the Lord Soul Hunt, let's do a little side content. In the swamp of Blighttown, you can find this massive tree, and after 2 fake walls, you discover that it goes much deeper than you would think. After avoiding the curse-giving basilisks and getting jumped by mushrooms, we emerge into the Ash Lake. This foggy area where the water stretches out forever, we can find hundreds of giant trees leading up into the clouds. But wait, we went down to get here? Well, the tree that we went down was an arch tree, and arch trees more or less hold up the world in Dark Souls. I'm not 100% on this, but I believe that the Ash Lake is kind of like a world in between worlds. On the top of each arch tree is an entire world separate from Lordran. The lore of arch trees isn't entirely explained in the games, but I'm pretty sure that's how they work. Now, the dimension that Ash Lake is a part of seems to have also been where the fight between the lords and dragons took place, as the land has been scorched by the witches' firestorms. Remember that in the opening cinematic, we saw the primeval beings find the fire inside of an arch tree? In this area is a Hydra. Now, I don't really know why he's swimming in the primordial soup, but whatever. And there's also clams, which make a lot more sense to me since clams are pretty ancient animals. At the end of Ash Lake, we can find a whole-ass everlasting dragon. He lets us join a covenant of undead seeking to become dragons, trying to repopulate the dragons. You can't kill him because he is an everlasting dragon, but he has no interest in fighting you. He's probably hiding down here in hopes that the gods above never realize that he's alive. Of course, what he doesn't know is that the gods are in no shape to fight him, but still. Ash Lake is a weird area. It exists out of time and space, but if you progress the Dragon's Covenant enough, you can actually get an item that allows you to become this little furry dragon thing. It looks super goofy. You know, honestly, they never got the dragon form down throughout all 3 games. Now let's head down to the catacombs to find that old bag of bones, Nito. First area of the catacombs kinda sucks. You have to track down these necromancers or kill the skeletons with divine weapons to stop them from respawning. It's a cool idea. Unfortunately, the skeletons fucking suck. They have this super annoying roll attack which is insanely quick, and they will chase you to the ends of the earth. Building on that are the even worse pinwheel skeletons who can easily stunlock and kill you. But down here we find another blacksmith, a skeleton blacksmith, and he's kind of a dick at first. He breaks the wall for us and basically tells us to get out of his sight. He's not much more friendly after that, but if you're persistent, he'll eventually change his tune to less of a fuck you, and more of a listen man, I'm just here to work, which we can all understand.
One are you not? But I'm afraid I'm a mere blacksmith. It's just me and my trade. I would be of no help to a righteous warrior such as yourself.
Down here you can also crawl into a casket and get dragged straight into Nito's lair. You can't fight him here though, instead you can join his covenant, the Gravelord servants. You can use a consumable item called an Eye of Death to add new, harder enemies into other players' worlds until they invade you to stop them. If you kill them, you get more Eyes of Death. Unfortunately, it only adds the new enemies on New Game Plus, so it's kinda lame normally. But the boss of this area is maybe one of the hardest in the series. His name is Pinwheel. After conquering that beast, we get an item that lets us kindle our bonfires to give us more healing items and proceed into the Tomb of the Giants. Now, Pinwheel is a super easy boss, but his lore is actually kinda sad. Pinwheel was a necromancer in Nito's service, but unlike most necromancers, he didn't pursue this power for only evil. Pinwheel's body is made up of 3 masks and 4 arms wrapped in a giant robe. 1 mask is of the father, another of the mother, and a third of the child. Pinwheel was the father who lost his wife and child, and he pursued necromancy to try to revive them. He didn't truly succeed in reviving them though, instead just combining the 3 of their bodies into one, which is the robed mask that we call Pinwheel. Alright, now remember that Rhea girl and her 3 cleric companions? Well, they were headed down to collect kindling for bonfires. Bones are used as kindling, so the catacombs are definitely the best place to get them. Anyway, we can find this nice bald fellow named Patches down here. He tells us about some treasure down the hole, but when we go to look, he kicks our ass down. We find Rhea and the 2 other clerics down here. Apparently the same happened to them, but how did Petrus back on the surface avoid this fate? Well, anyway, after we kill her 2 guards who have now gone hollow, Rhea will head back to the surface so we can continue our journey. You can also talk to Patches again and either accept or reject his apology for trying to kill you. Now this area is called the Tomb of the Giants, so as one would expect, the skeletons are now giant. There's also some of them that crawl on all fours and act like dogs, so I guess the giants were kinda kinky. Now I hate to say it, but the late game so far is 2 for 2 in being complete dog shit. The difficulty of this area is that it's nearly pitch black, so you need to bring some kind of lantern with you just to not fall off cliffs. It's a mercifully short area though, but the run back to the boss is just stupid. Nito's in this cave past a bunch of baby skeletons that will put Toxic on you, a status effect that deals a lot of damage over a long time, and a bunch of Pinwheel clones who launch fire at you. Pinwheel could clone himself in his fight too, so these are probably just clones that he gave Nito as guards. Now, Nito himself is a boss fight that I really wish was better. I mean, he looks so cool. But unfortunately, his boss fight sucks. Now, Nito himself is super weak. He's insanely slow, which, he is a walking pile of bones, so it makes sense. The hard part about this fight is, one, that Nito's attacks also apply Toxic. But mostly is that he has this gang of skeletons around him at all times, so you're not even fighting Nito for most of the fight. You're running from his skeletons. The skeletons revive themselves super quickly too, so what you have to do is wait until Nito hits this explosion move that will kill all his guards, then you rush in to damage them before they respawn. I really wish you could just fight Nito alone and they gave him a couple more moves, but whatever. We can also catch a glimpse of the area that Ash Lake is in as we can see more arch trees under the world. This makes me think that Nito pretty much helped kill the dragons and just crawled in a cave and chilled, while everyone else tried to rule the world. Once we kill the old man, we can get his Lord Soul and continue our quest. Alright, I'm happy to say that the next two areas and bosses aren't anywhere near as bad as the last, but as we head back to the surface we can find Patches, apparently having turned over a new leaf. He's now a merchant. We can also find Rhea, who tells us that Patches tricked them into falling down the hole and Petrus abandoned them. Now, if you leave Petrus alive here, he'll kill Rhea, probably to cover up how much of a coward he is, so of course I killed that motherfucker. The next area is the New Londo Ruins, a completely flooded city now populated only by ghosts. The only way to damage the ghosts is to either use one of their weapons, be cursed, or use an item called a transient curse. They're pretty generous with the transient curses though, so this area isn't too hard, although they do spam the ghosts at you. There's ghosts with knives and ones with babies in their arms, and the babies can actually shoot lightning at you when they cry, which is interesting. Now these ghosts are almost certainly women who used to live in New Londo before it got flooded. After clearing a particularly ghost-infested house, we find this guy in red robes. If we have the Lord Vessel, he gives us a key to unlock some kind of seal. This seal turns out to be a giant door that serves as a dam that's keeping the city flooded. So the city was flooded intentionally? Why? Well, we'll see later. He also warns us that the Four Kings are in something called the Abyss, and that he knows no way to travel it, but one of Gwyn's four knights, Artorias, managed it somehow. Now, I need you to keep all this in mind for a moment, because there's this really small change in a cutscene later that I want to happen. In order for it to happen, we need to do the DLC. So let's head way back to Darkroot Garden. At the bottom of the garden, you can find a bunch of these crystal golems, as well as another Hydra. Past them, around the corner of this lake, you can find a golden crystal golem, and killing it reveals a girl trapped inside. Her name is Dusk, and she's from an ancient land called Elysial. She says that somehow she's been trapped outside of time, but you can summon her for a moment and she'll teach you some spells. Next, what you need to do is head to the Duke's Archive, home of Seath the Scaleless, and kill this one specific crystal golem at the entrance. It'll drop an item called the Broken Pendant. Taking the pendant back to the spot where we originally freed Dusk from the crystal golem reveals that there's this mysterious portal here now. Interacting with it results in this gnarly eye-covered hand reaching out and pulling you in. It's pretty convoluted, but here we are now in the Artorias of the Abyss DLC. The DLC starts right off with the boss fight against the Sanctuary Guardian, this Chimera-type monster with a lion head, bird wings, and a scorpion tail. After defeating it, we come into this nice little garden where we can talk to a mushroom named Elizabeth. She's Dusk's godmother, and she recognizes us as the person who saved Dusk. It seems like we'll have to save her again though, as she's been trapped by some sort of primeval human. Like the New Londo guy, she warns us that an abyss is swallowing this land, and the Artorias came to fight it off, but he's sure to have come to it by now. Quick mention, Gwyn's four knights were Ornstein, Artorias, Go, and Siren. We already killed Ornstein, but we will be meeting the other three over the course of the DLC. Anyway, as we continue, we find ourselves in Darkroot Garden, and the name actually makes more sense now, because it's actually a big royal garden tended to by these guys. The same armored knights can be found here, although their weapons are different, and they're not quite as mossy. In this area, you can also find some of this abyss kind of stuff leaking out as you find grass stained black. You can also catch a glimpse of a massive black dragon here, but he flies away before you can do anything about it. Toward the end of the area, you can find a Marvelous Chester, an NPC who was also torn from this time period to come back here. He looks like he's from much farther in the future from us though. Some people even think he's from Bloodborne, which is backed up by his attire, but I don't know about all that. The boss, as you might expect, is Knight Artorias, and I think he's probably the best boss in the game. In my first attempt, he started off hot and destroyed my ass as I was trying to apply my buffs. It's an amazing duel, but as you damage Artorias more, he seems to succumb to the abyss more and more, slowly using more of its power to buff himself. Artorias clearly lost his fight against the Abyss here. Artorias also lost against the Abyss in another area. We'll talk about that after the DLC. When you defeat him, you free him from the Abyss and give the legendary knight a fitting end. This still leaves a lot of questions though. What is this Abyss and who was this giant dragon we saw in the forest? Well, if you return to the spot you killed Artorias, you can find Sirin, Gwyn's fourth knight and maybe Artorias' girlfriend. She asks you to give her the man's soul in exchange for her weapons. She wants to honor him and put his soul to rest. You can also just kill her for her weapons, but that's a little less nice. Continuing through the town, we find that the influence of the Abyss is getting worse. All the townspeople have been transformed into these gray, many-eyed monsters who can cast dark magic at us. You can also get invaded by Chester here. What a dick. But as you make your way through the town, you'll eventually find a mysterious key. Taking that key back to the place where you kill Artorias and heading up a tower unlocks a door where we meet the last of Gwyn's 4 knights. He's a giant named Hawkeye Goff, an archer who shot arrows so big he could bring down dragons in a single shot. By the time we find him though, he's apparently gone blind and spends his days carving idols that'll say something if you drop them. He's probably my favorite character in the game. He's just such a nice guy that asks nothing of you at any time. He thanks you for killing Artorias and giving him an honorable end, but warns us of the black dragon that stalks these parts, the one we saw in the forest. He said that the dragon is far beyond our abilities, but of course we ignore his warning and go find it anyway in this ravine nearby. The dragon pretty much stays in the air and spams fire at you, so he was right in a way. If you return to Goff after having seen the dragon in the ravine though, he asks if the dragon is getting in your way. If you say yes, he then asks if you're really down to fight a dragon, which of course we say yes to. We then get this super badass cutscene where this blind giant picks up a massive bow and shoots a moving dragon out of the air. What a fucking G. We can now go fight the dragon, Kalameet, on fair terms. Fighting the dragon gives us a very enjoyable boss fight, other than one specific attack Kalameet has, which is just ear-splittingly loud. Now you might notice, this everlasting dragon wasn't so everlasting. I was able to kill him with just normal weapons. Goff himself told us that even Anor Londo was afraid of Kalameet, so how could this be? Well, first of all, Kalameet is a descendant of the everlasting dragons, like Gaping Dragon, so it could just be that it's lost these traits over time. However, I doubt that any of the gods of Anor Londo would have been scared to fight Gaping Dragon, so why else could this have been? Well, I think the Abyss could have kind of rotted off the scales of Kalameet. We see how it's changed the Elysial townsfolk, so it could have been affecting the dragon as well. I think it could also be that these two dragons might be descended from Seath the Scaleless in some way, since obviously he had none of the everlasting scales. We'll meet another one of Seath's kids later in the game, and while she definitely looks nothing like Kalameet or Gaping Dragon, they all share the trait of not being everlasting. Plus, none of them look anywhere close to the Stone Dragon, which we know is an everlasting dragon. That's a far-fetched theory though, so I wouldn't put too much stock into that. But we can go back to Go, and he congratulates us for killing the dragon, then sharing some old stories from his time as a dragon slayer. He also tells us more about this Abyss and why it's taking over Elysial. Chester also tells us some of this, but we learn that the people of the town were seduced by a dark serpent, Darkstalker Kath, the same kind of serpent as Kingseeker Frampt from earlier. This serpent got them to unearth the body of a primordial being named Manus. Now this is a character a lot of people think is the furtive pygmy from the opening, and I think it's very possible. But Kath had them awake Manus in hopes to have the caveman become his very own Dark Lord and rule the world. We'll return to this later. Unearthing Manus allows him to share some of his primal dark sorceries with the people of Elysial. Dark sorceries draw from the dark soul inside humans, so they're mostly a human-exclusive thing. All we know for now is that somehow the people of Elysial drove Manus mad, causing him to unleash the darkness inside of him and create the Abyss, which began swallowing their city. He asks us to kill Manus and stop the Abyss from spreading further, although he acknowledges that when the flame finally fades, it'll be back. He also mentions that he knows the giant blacksmith, one of the other nicest characters in the game. One last note on Goff, he's not actually blind. If for some reason you decide to try to kill him, you can loot his helmet and learn that the eye holes have been sealed by resin, by the people of Elysial. Now, you never see giants without helmets in this game, so likely Goff never took his helmet off and he never noticed that he wasn't actually blind. It could also be that he doesn't really care. He seems to believe that he's purposeless without any dragons to hunt, so maybe he welcomed the blindness so that he could finally retire and just do his wood carvings. Now, why did the people do this to such a nice guy, though? Well, Goff likely came here to investigate the rumors of the dark magic that people were practicing. They, of course, didn't want one of Gwyn's knights looking into this, so they secretly covered his eyes and locked him in a tower so they could continue unbothered. Well, the only thing left to do was find this Manus right in the heart of the Abyss. Heading through the rest of the town and past this very weird enemy, which I've never really known what it is, we finally end up in the Abyss, the cave system where they unearthed the Manus. In here we can find disembodied humanity sprites. Humanity is basically the dark soul inside of a human. If you use one, you can restore your appearance to human. So Manus has the power to create new humanity as well as corrupt the townspeople. Also down here is the entire reason I decided to do the DLC before New Londo. In a hidden area, you get guided by a cat named Alvina to find Artorias' wolf companion Sif. After Artorias lost his fight against Manus, he was being overwhelmed and corrupted by the Abyss. But in his last act of lucidity, he planted his shield on the ground, creating a protective barrier around his dog. What a guy right there. If we kill the humanity surrounding Sif, he escapes the Abyss and survives. Continuing through, we can eventually find the Manus himself, and the fight begins by him grabbing you off a cliff and taking you straight down to the boss arena. Manus is kind of a mix between some kind of ape and some kind of deer with his antlers. It's a cool boss design and definitely the hardest fight in Dark Souls 1. He has this combo attack, which if you get hit by one part of the combo, you're stuck getting hit by the rest of it, and I could never figure out how to dodge it. He also has some very annoying magic to throw at you in his second phase. Interestingly, the last time I beat this game, I beat Manus first try. This time took me like 20, but enough about that. How did the people of Elysial drive Manus mad? Well, remember that broken pendant that got us to the DLC in the first place? Well, that belonged to Manus. It was important to him, probably a relic of someone he knew and loved back in his day. Well, the nobles of Elysial thought that would look great around the Princess of Elysial's neck, that princess being Dusk, so they stole the pendant from Manus, stealing the only relic of his former life he still had. This drove him mad and turned him into the abyss-creating monster that we fought. When you kill Manus, Dusk reappears, showing that he kidnapped her just like he kidnapped us when we entered the DLC. Now there's this kind of time paradox happening because we, the Chosen Undead, are the ones who stopped the flow of the Abyss from destroying Elysial and probably the rest of Lordran. But we were probably born hundreds of years after this happened, so in order for us to be born, we had to stop the Abyss. Anyway, Artorias got the credit for stopping the Abyss, and Dusk will even comment on how similar we look to Artorias. We don't look similar at all, it was us who saved you, you dumbass. But keep Darkstalker Kath, the Abyss, and Artorias' wolf Sif in your mind for a second as we return to the main game and head back to present-day Darkroot Garden. This part of the woods was locked behind an item called the Crest of Artorias, and inside we can find a bunch of human NPCs who attack on sight. Getting past them though, we get to meet with Alvina again, the cat who helped us save Sif. She'll offer us to join her covenant, the Forest Hunters. They prevent invaders from accessing the deeper parts of the forest for some reason. It's a fun PvP covenant, but unfortunately one of the NPCs has this ring that lets you do cartwheels when you roll, so I had to kill him and betray the covenant ASAP. So we continue past the Forest Guardians and past some giant cat things. I think they're probably the same species as Alvina, or maybe cats in this world just look like that. But eventually we find ourselves at the door of what seems to have once been an arena. Opening it reveals a giant grave, on top of which we can see the great sword of Artorias. Yep, it's the grave of Artorias, and it's grown a little in size since Siren made it. Now remember that the new Londo Seal guy told us that only Artorias was able to travel the Abyss. Well, that's why we're here, to rob his grave and steal the ring that allowed him to do it. Before we can open the grave, the great grey wolf Sif lunges at us. She's much bigger than she was before. I'll just let the cutscene play. Now that might be the cutest thing I've ever seen, but it's ruined by Sif's commitment to defending the grave of her former master, so we have to kill the poor doggy. And if you don't do it quick enough, you can even see Sif limping around towards the end of the fight. It's super sad. But once we finish Sif, we receive Artorias' ring and can go fight the Four Kings. That Sif cutscene was the entire reason I did the DLC, by the way. If you don't do it, he won't recognize you and it's not nearly as sad. Heading back to New Londo, with the seal broken, the floodwater has been drained, revealing the area connects directly with an area called the Valley of Drakes. There's still some of those ghosts, but most enemies here are either these humanoids with sick-ass armor called Dark Wraiths, or these giant masses of darkness. Eventually we'll reach this tower that extends down into the darkness, using Artorias' ring, a ring that allows one to traverse the abyss like its own residents would. We're about to go down this hole and fight the Four Kings. Now before we fight them, let's discuss what actually happened here in Anor Londo. So first of all, the events I'm discussing all happened before the abyss took over Ulusiel. So, Darkstalker Kath, one of those primordial serpents just like Frampt, showed up in New Londo. New Londo was a city built by the Four Kings, humans that received a portion of Gwyn's Lord Soul for their service in the Dragon War. Kath appeared to these humans and taught them the art of Life Drain, an ability that lets them steal life to stave off the undead curse that, remember, Gwyn put on humanity. The Four Kings shared this knowledge with their entire army, creating the Dark Wraiths. Now you don't really want to steal life from your own citizens, so the kings and their army started to use Kath's Red Eye Orbs, items that allowed them to attack other humans and steal their humanity. Around this time, the Four Kings managed to open their own little abyss in the middle of New Londo, changing them into the anime villains that we fight in-game. Now all of this might seem pretty fucked up, but in Dark Souls this is honestly kind of the natural state of humanity. Manus' abyss was fueled by rage and hatred, so it twisted people into monsters, but this abyss granted the kings and Dark Wraiths immense power and allowed them to tap into the power in their own Dark Souls. Now if you remember way back in the beginning of the video, this is exactly what Gwyn didn't want to happen. However, at this point Gwyn had already gone and linked the flame. He only split up his Lord Soul after he linked the flame. So Anor Londo was currently falling apart due to nobody liking Gwendolyn enough to stick around, and the most resistance they could muster was to send Artorias to go kill the kings. Artorias made a pact with some abyss beasts, maybe Kath, in order to traverse the abyss and fight the kings. However, he fucking lost. Artorias was 0-2 in fighting the abyss, so his last resort was to call upon a few sorcerers, known as Guardians of the Seal, to flood the city of Anor Londo and keep the abyss within from spreading. We fight the Four Kings in a real abyss. Manus' was dark, but this one is literally absent of light. They look pretty cool, like I said earlier, anime villains, and what you'll notice is that there's much more than 4 of them. This fight isn't too hard though, and once you kill them you obtain the Lord Soul. Now if you did all of this before planting the Lord Vessel, you can actually meet Kath and he'll let you become a Dark Wraith, giving you the Life Drain item and eventually their armor. He tells us a lot of things that we already know, but he'll also say that he believes, unlike his previous clients, them being Manus and the Four Kings, we can truly become a Dark Lord and usher in the Age of Man. Now this whole thing with the Four Kings was kind of a trial run for Kath. He wanted to create a champion of darkness that could lead humanity to overthrow the gods and usher in an Age of Darkness. When the kings failed, he went to Ulusiel and convinced them to free Manus, hoping the Monkey Man would be his champion. When Manus went mad though, Kath once again retreated into the darkness, waiting for a new champion to appear. That champion could be us, but we'll come back to this later. It's time for more side content. Let's head to the top of Firelink Shrine where we can get snatched up by the same bird that saved us from the Undead Asylum, this time to go back to the prison. Seems like with the death of the Asylum Demon, the Undead are kind of running the place now. When we go into the room where we first fought the demon, the floor falls out to reveal an even bigger Asylum Demon. The Stray Demon isn't too hard though, and after killing him we can return to our original cell, now guarded by a Black Knight, and find this peculiar doll. Now taking the doll back to that giant painting in Anor Londo sucks us into the painting, revealing the painted world of Ariamis. This place is interesting because it has a lot of connections to Velka, the goddess of sin. Her whole thing is crows, so maybe it was her who saved us from the asylum in the first place. The painted world contains things that the other gods would like contained, specifically a dark ember which does more damage to some gods, and the area boss who we'll talk about in a bit. It was originally created to be kind of a comforting home for this being, and the undead who resided within. However, it seems like with everything else in the world, it decayed over time. Some of the undead here are all puffed up in disease, and some others have melted into mounds of flesh. We find these harpies here, servants of Velka, and I gotta say, they're kinda bad. I mean, I would be making the same noises as my character in that situation. But eventually we emerge onto this bridge where we find an intact undead dragon, until it splits itself apart once again. The bottom half of the dragon now blocks the bridge, and I'm sure there's an actual way to get past it, but I've always just used this glitch that makes the legs stand up and let you pass. This lets us access the boss room where we're greeted by this giant robed woman named Crossbreed Priscilla. Do you remember earlier when I said that we meet one of Seath's kids in game? Well, this is her, but who would have fucked a dragon to create this kid?
One of us thou art not.
Well, it was another one of Gwyn's kids, this time Guinevere, so really the only kid who actually stuck to Gwyn's ideals was the one he hated, Gwendolyn.
Thou seekest
I should mention that it's not actually confirmed that Guinevere is the mother, but I've been thinking that it was for the past 10 years, so I'm just going with it. So Crossbreed is a half-goddess, half-dragon, but Seath is a friendly dragon, so that alone wouldn't mean she had to be condemned here. The real reason is because she developed a power called Life Hunt, an occult power capable of killing the gods. So as a little girl, she was trapped in the Painted World, forever guarded by the Painting Guardians. Now, the Painted World was designed to be a peaceful place where she could live out her days surrounded by nice snowy mountains. But of course, as time went on, all of her human servants turned undead and things went to shit. We see Velka's influence here likely just because she's the goddess of sin. So this being that's considered an abomination is right up her alley and someone she'd want to protect. Anyway, Priscilla tells us that we should just jump off this plank and be returned to the real world. She says that we don't belong here and we're disturbing her peace. You can do that if you want, but I'm a hater, so I decided to fight her anyway. Being the daughter of an everlasting dragon without scales, she's not too tough, although she can turn completely invisible. When you kill her, she even wonders why, and the only answer is, fuck you, that's why. Returning to the real world, we're now ready to finish off Seath's bloodline by killing the dragon himself. So let's head to the Duke's archive and claim that Lord Soul. The first part of the archive has us fighting past a few armored boars and the crystal servants, some of Seath's experiments on the undead. Leading the servants are the Channelers, powerful sorcerers in the service of Seath. The Channelers also appear in a few other locations, most notably is one near the Gaping Dragon. Now, I said a long-shot theory earlier that maybe Gaping Dragon is a descendant of Seath, but I wouldn't put too much stock in that, as it's just as likely Seath was just looking into rumors of the Sewer Dragon. Neither have everlasting scales, but Gaping's scales could easily just have rotted off because of him living in sewage. Now, not far into the archives, we come face to face with the Naked Dragon himself. He's invincible here, so you have no choice but to die. Waking up, we see that we're locked in a prison cell with some of the crystal servants. We're likely to become one of them if we stick around. The area is guarded by the same lizards who ran Sen's fortress, so Seath might have had some influence there as well. When we escape our cell, the lizards activate this music box that plays a strange melody. A melody that enrages these strange tentacle snakes called Picasas. These things are also results of Seath's experiments, although I believe these are specifically holy maidens, because 2 of them will drop miracles like the ones Rhea sells. We can also find Big Hat Logan locked in the cell down here. I mean, this guy can't do anything without our help. We can eventually shut down the music and get a key that will let us escape the prison and get back to the rest of the archives. Now, this area has these moving staircases that were super confusing to me when I was 12 years old, and it's filled with more channelers and crystal servants. Eventually, we can find the key to Big Hat's cell and let him out. He, of course, heads straight for the library like the nerd he is. Catching up with him there, he can teach you about crystal sorceries and tells us why Seath was invincible last time we saw him. He's using an artifact called the Primordial Crystal to imitate the immortality other dragons get from their scales. Now, I imagine Seath was probably a social outcast and probably got bullied due to his lack of skills, but that's no excuse to become a mad scientist turning people into crystal slaves. Big Hat here also tells us that the crystal lays deep within the nearby Crystal Garden, so if we want to kill Seath, that's where we're headed. Crystal Gardens are a very beautiful area populated by moonlight butterflies and more of those crystal golems. We can even find gold ones, like the one Dusk was trapped in. If I had to guess, I would say Seath trapped Dusk in one, probably to research Ulasil magic, as it's different from the soul magic he usually uses. This area also has a lot of completely invisible walkways, which are very fun when you have to run back to the boss. Eventually we can find the Primordial Crystal, but Seath flies down to stop us before we can destroy it. Unsuccessfully though, as he's way too slow to prevent us from destroying his one and only source of immortality. This is also the first time we get a good look at the dragon, and yeesh. His entire bottom half is made up of 2 tentacles and a tail, another reason why he was probably bullied in Dragon Society. He throws a lot of crystal magic at you, and the fight involves a lot of running around to keep up with his tentacles, but eventually we can kill the blue dragon and claim the rest of Gwyn's Lord Soul. We are now ready to complete our mission and kindle the first flame, so let's go back to Firelink Altar to add Lord Souls to the fire. Adding them to the fire causes it to swell up and open this massive gate. This gate leads us to the kiln of the first flame, the place where all of this started. It looks like it's been hit by a nuke though. The area is completely covered in ash and all the trees and vegetation have completely burned down. The only enemies left are Gwyn's most loyal Black Knights, those who fought the demons of Izalith for him. Fighting past the rest of Gwyn's forces, we can find a summon sign for Solaire. The man may not have accomplished his goal of finding his own son, but he's more than willing to help us achieve ours. With Solaire in tow, we can find Gwyn himself, no longer the golden god he once was, now just a hollowed out old man. Having given away his Lord Soul, he doesn't have any lightning to throw at us, instead wielding the fire of the First Flame in one last test to make sure we're worthy. Defeating Gwyn, we find out what it really means to link the fire. You use your own body as kindling. Now empowered by all the souls you claimed along the way, the First Flame explodes out once again, re-scorching the land nearby and giving the world a new breath of life. The fire will fade, the world will go to shit again, and another undead will have to embark on the very same quest we just did. So what if we don't link the fire? Well, if after you defeat Gwyn, you just leave the First Flame, you find 10 primordial serpents gathered outside to greet you. Both Kath and Frampt have joined you and agree to serve you and help you usher in the new age of darkness.
My lord, bless thy safe return. Let Kath and Frampt serve your highness. We are here to serve your highness. Let the true dark be cast upon the world. Our Lord hath returned.
We know that this age of darkness is when humanity will be the most powerful. I mean, we just killed all the most powerful beings in the land anyway. But remember, this whole game started off by a random spark creating the First Flame. The same will happen again, it's only a matter of time. And when it does happen, new lords will rise up to subjugate humanity, and the fire will fade again, and it goes on and on and on, an endless cycle. But that's the story of Dark Souls 1. Comment what you thought about my recap, and thank you so much for watching.